everyone, welcome back to my channel. This is Heidi from My Reading Life, and I'm here today to film a recent reads video. I've been doing quite a bit of reading this last few weeks, and most of what I've been reading has to do with Black History Month. So let's just get into it and talk about the books. I'm in my car because I'm out at my camp, and this is the quietest place that I can find to talk about books. And probably the best lighting as well. So here we are. We're doing car talk today. And the first book that I want to talk about is a book that I finished about a week ago, and that's The Trees by Percival Everett. This has been talked up all over BookTube, but I think the person who really sold me this book was Brian at Bookish. He really loved this book, and the way that he talked about it made me think that I would love it too. And then I saw it on Doris's recent video of Doris where she was going through her to-be-read pile and talking about which book she should read first, and I saw that she had The Trees on her shelf, and that made me feel FOMO, and I felt like I needed to read it immediately. And then I saw a copy of it at my local library. So I grabbed it and I read it, and it was the kind of book where you start reading it and you just can't put it down. You fly through it. It's really short chapters, really punchy language, a lot of dialogue, and everything just moves along really quickly. It is satire, and it is a story that takes place in Money, Mississippi. And when we open, where there's been some murders of some white folks, and at each of the murder scenes there has also been a dead black man who resembles Emmett Till. And so the local law enforcement is like, they don't know what to do about this. It's a very strange situation. And the satire comes from, this book is spoofing on all of the racist problems that exist in our society today, and just sort of like showing how absurd a lot of the racism and the police brutality is in our culture. And so the book, as it continues on the storyline, we get two black investigators from the Mississippi Bureau of Investigations that come down from their, big city office to like oversee these investigations into these murders, because the small town law enforcement doesn't seem to be able to handle it, and they think it probably is a hate crime type of a thing, or there's some kind of racial component involved. So we have these two black investigators that come and trying to deal with the small southern town and the racism that they encounter there, and the events of the book just start to pick up and become more and more absurd and satirical. So the language is very crass. There is a lot of violence. But I laughed out loud so many times in this book. And I mean, it's laughter, and then you're just horrified, because this book is really shining a light on the absurdity in our culture. And it was so good. It was so good. I loved what Percival Everett was saying with this book. I think it's really, really well done. I mean, satire is probably not my normal cup of tea, but the way that Percival Everett wrote it in The Trees was definitely my cup of tea. So I will warn you though, if a lot of violence on the page, or like really, really crass language bothers you, this probably isn't a book for you. But otherwise than that, I would please encourage you to pick this one up and give it a try. I think it's a really excellent book, and I will definitely be reading more Percival Everett in the future. The next book that I want to talk about is a book that I buddy read with Britta Bowler, and is also the pick for Kim at Middle of the Book March's monthly book club, her Blind Eye book club, and that's Mama Day by Gloria Naylor. I had read Women of Brewster Place before by Naylor and loved it. That book was amazing, and I wanted to read more Gloria Naylor. So I was glad to have a chance to pick this one up. I read it as an ebook, and I did like the story, but there was one particular event that happened halfway through the book that really colored the rest of my experience with the book. I just could not let it go. I could not get it out of my mind. And so all the rest of the events that happen from that point on were colored by my reaction to this one particular event. So this tells the story of Mama Day, who is an elderly woman who lives on an island off the coast between South Carolina and Georgia, and her sister Abigail, and Abigail's daughter Ophelia. And it's really two storylines because Ophelia is in New York City. It's in the 80s. She's a young woman trying to find work and, be a working, a person in an office type work. And the kind of racism and sexism that she encounters has really impacted how she views the world and how she reacts to the world. And she meets a man named George, and the story really revolves around Ophelia and George's budding relationship. And then back on this island, which is an island of a very peculiar community of descendants from a group of enslaved people who were freed by their person who had enslaved them, and lived and built this community on this island. So we're several generations past that initial freedom, and the one woman who was sort of the matriarch and the beginning of this lineage. And so we're toggling back and forth between Ophelia's story in New York City and the people that live on the island, Mama Day being the central character. Mama Day is a healer and is very central to the community. And there are lots of storylines, other separate, like minor storylines that go with her healing capabilities. And I loved the Mama Day character. And I will say that Gloria Naylor just does characters so amazingly well. She really, brought these folks to life. There were a couple of secondary storylines that I really liked, particularly dealing with fertility and things like that. So I don't want to get into too much of the plot because of spoilers, but there is a lot of magical realism. And as the book goes on and progresses and gets closer to the end, like events get even more fantastical than when the beginning of the story. So it progressively gets more fantastical. So I liked the book, but didn't love it the way that I loved Women of Brewster Place. I will definitely read more Gloria Naylor. I have another book of hers on my TBR pile, and I just think she can really tell a story and she can really write characters well. And it was just my particular issue with this one event that happens that I think colored the book for me. And that is something that's, individual to me and not to the book, I think. Then I finished A Mercy by Toni Morrison. This was a buddy read with Doris and Patrice and Karen. And it was also for Black History Month, and is my third Toni Morrison after I've read The Bluest Eye and Beloved. And A Mercy is a historical fiction story. It takes place in the 1600s. We're following a man named Jacob who has a small farm in New England, but he's also a trader. And the story opens up with him receiving, in lieu of payment for some loans that he's given out, a young Black girl who is enslaved. Now, Jacob is not interested in, at least at the beginning of the story, is not interested in dealing with enslaved people, but he also knows that he's not going to get his money back from this particular individual. And he feels really bad for this young girl because Jacob is the kind of person who takes in strays, basically. And so the story progresses on from there, and we follow the story, the perspectives back and forth through different chapters of Florence, the young girl that he takes in payment, and the other women that live on the farm with him. His wife, Rebecca, a indigenous woman who is sort of a servant named Lena, another young woman who was orphaned and has come to live on the farm named Sorrow. And so the very, very first chapter of the book is told from this perspective. You're not sure who it is. It's very confusing. It's really difficult to penetrate what's going on. And then the second chapter is Jacob. And then we get a chapter from the perspective again of the first chapter, and then it goes on and we get Lena's perspective and so on and so forth. So every character gets their own chapter and their perspective. And it is really a story about the relationships between women, how people are held in bondage in different ways, particularly in this time period, but how that relates to present day as well. It is really a profound story and very deep. And like with all Toni Morrison books, I feel like I probably did not catch everything that she was putting out there with her narrative. I will say I enjoyed this one because it's quite brief. It's less than 200 pages long. So it doesn't feel as daunting as some of her other works. And I really enjoyed the exploration of the relationships between women, whether it's mother and daughter, or friends, or mistress of a property and her servants, just the different ways that women related to each other, particularly in this time period, and the barriers that they faced, the ways that they were oppressed, the ways that they were not safe in the world, all very, very important to read about, but also very difficult to read about. It is a sad story, as all Toni Morrison stories seem to be. And so, yeah, this one, I am really glad that I read it. And just another, underlining of what a brilliant writer Toni Morrison is, I guess, is what I have to say about that. The next book I completed was Kibogo by Scholastique Mukasonga. That was translated from the French, and I don't remember the translator's name, so I will write that on the screen for you. And this is a short, basically novella, about 150 pages, and it is, 4 basically short stories that are connected to each other. And it is fiction, but it's telling the story of this village in Rwanda where the colonizers, I believe the Belgians, have come in and sort of changed how everything is done, and have installed these religious ministers or clergy of some kind, and sort of forced or coerced the people into converting to Christianity, away from their native religions. And so the people of this village are sort of struggling to make sense of their world and the events that are happening, because the foundation of how they explained what was happening in their world through their religious practices has changed to the white man's religion. And not all of that white man's religion, or the way that white men deal with the world, makes sense to them. But they're trying, right? They're trying to accept their new reality. And so we're getting the story of sort of basically a legend from the local religion, and how that legend is clashing with the Christianity that's being imposed upon these people, and how it's being co-opted and woven into white religion. And it was a decent story, but there was no real, the characterization was very much lacking. I did not feel like I knew any of the characters. The characters they felt sort of cardboard cutout, not really people, not real people. And I just didn't feel connected to the story in any way. I didn't feel like there was anybody for me to care about, or to root for, or to root against. I think that the message that Scholastique Mukasonga is trying to convey with this book, at least the message that I took from it, which is, what's the difference between, why are we supposed to believe that Christianity is real and the native religion of Rwanda is a legend or a myth, right? What makes one a mythology and one real? Only your belief, right? And so imposing your belief on what is real and what is not real is not great. And so I like that theme, but I don't feel like I really connected with the story. I wish that this had been nonfiction, a nonfiction about the religion of Rwanda, the native practices. I think I would have connected with that a lot more, because, like I said, the ideas behind the story were interesting to me, but the story was really didn't hit me very much at all. And then the last thing that I have finished just this morning is White Trash by Nancy Isenberg. And this is a buddy read with Rachel. And it is a history of poor white people in the United States, from pre-formation of the United States as a country to the present day. I think the book was published in 2016, and the evolution of the terminology that we use for poor white people, and how poor white people have suffered from the economic system of the United States from before we were even a country until the present day, and how that designation is really due to the class structure of the United States, that we don't actually recognize that we have a class system, but we very obviously do. I think that this book is a very good companion to read with the book Caste by Isabel Wilkerson. It is, it was very dry and academic, and so I don't recommend it for its readability, because I think it is quite difficult that way. But in terms of like providing context to other things that I have read about the history of the United States, and about how different groups of people have been treated and sort of marginalized and oppressed or held back, I think that this fills in some different gaps, and did provide some interesting facts that I was unaware of. Some things that, I felt were less well done were sort of how the, particularly in the very first section, the book split up into 3 parts. And I felt in the first part, particularly, it lacked context and discussion of how poor white people were treated in context with other minorities who were poor. But I think the book does a better job of that in the second and third parts. And I do think, like I said, it's not something I think you should just read on its own. I think if you're interested in how different groups of people have been marginalized and sort of used by our capitalist society, I think that this is a one piece of the puzzle, but it is not the entire piece. It isn't the whole picture. And so I would caution anybody from only reading white trash and not reading some other histories that would sort of fill in the whole story. But I think another thing that I really did like about this book was organized around, as it moved through the time periods of U.S. history, is sort of organized around different presidents. And so it helped, because I've been working on my presidential reading challenge, my biographies of presidents. It sort of provided some other context to some of those presidents that I've already read. And I found that really interesting. So yeah, I think I can't like wholeheartedly recommend it to everyone, but I think if it's an area of history that you're interested in, it does provide some more context to a lot of themes that I have been interested in reading about. So that's it. Those are the books that I've been reading lately. I hope there's something in there that you will find interesting. I hope you're all doing well and finding some great books to read, and I will talk to you later.